Hi, you're watching the next video in my series looking at my Finwick Quay N-gauge model railway layout, and today we're going to be looking at DCC wiring, more so how I've wired my DCC layout. I'm not saying that this is the right way to do it, it's an example of one way to do it, and obviously if you've got an oval then you're going to need to think about a few more things than I have with my end-to-end. But hopefully it'll give you a rough idea. And we're going to start off by looking at some of the tools and equipment that I used. And when I started to research DCC, I got a couple of books from the library. There wasn't a lot in the library, but what I did do was to buy this book. Fairly thought-provoking. There's some interesting information in here, but not really anything that I couldn't learn off of the internet from the forums and video channels, much like my YouTube channel. One of the resources that I would recommend are the Pico guides. I've used these for laying the track and all sorts of different things, and as they do a guide for introducing DCC, and I found this to have pretty much all of the more relevant information in it, and for the amount of money that these little pamphlet guides cost, I think they're well worth their money. Some of the tools that I used, bradawl became very useful for making holes and pilot holes for screws and for drilling the wires. Obviously a drill, which I haven't got with me right now, that's put away, but you do need to have a fairly small drill bit. This is for running the wires down, and a slightly bigger drill bit for the point motors, so for the rods that move. You also need a decent pair of wire cutters. These are the ones that I use because I could set the gap to the gauge of wire that I was working with. I also used a pair of decent pliers. That was for crimping up the crimps. And I also had a decent pair of wire cutters so that I could get a good cut on the wire. Otherwise, usual things, glue, knife, a Stanley knife, things like that were used. I also had a small screwdriver, and that was used for the block connectors. And then some assorted insulation tape, just for insulating the end of wires as appropriate. And then my best find. Now my best find was from Express Models. It's a solderless wiring kit, which I think is aimed at DCC. It's a DCC power bus kit, but really I would use it for analog layouts as well, because it's just brilliant. Now I won't bring out the full length of wire, but you get 10 meters of brown power bus cable, and again 10 meters of blue power bus cable. And this is a cable that you run round your loop, or for me end to end, and I've used this for both my power bus. I've also used it for effectively a bus wire for my lights on the layout as well. Hugely useful. And then off of that, again in brown and blue, these are the packs that they come in. So this is a DCC power bus, a pack F layout wire. Again, 20 meters. I've got it in the wrong bag. 20 meters of brown, 20 meters of blue, and again, very useful. I would have preferred red and black, just because that's the way I am. But you get blue and brown in the layout in the pack, and that works just as well. You can still differentiate. You also get a number of these terminal blocks. There's two 12-way terminal blocks. I did use some cheaper ones which I got off of eBay. These were quite fiddly to use. Some of the screws were broken, and I tended to find that when I was screwing the wire down and securing it, they were quite sharp and it would break the small dropper wires. The Express Models version never had trouble with these. These were really nice. It immediately crimped up the secured the wire, never broke the wire. These were really nice to work with, and again, they come in the kit. We then start getting on to what I think is the best part about this kit. Now you have 10 what they call tap splices, and these are for joining two bits of wire together. And basically what you do is open this up a little bit so you can see. On the far side, sorry, the near side, you can run the wire right the way through. Okay. On the far side, on one side there's a little block. You can see just in there that there's a block off. So if I just turn this around, you can push the wire in and it goes past the metal, I'm not quite sure, the little clamp here, which then is going to clamp down on this piece of wire. And then if you get your second piece of wire and just run that all the way through, and to just open this up a little bit more, I'm just curling round one piece of wire here for a demonstration. Fold over the top, and this is where your pliers come in, because it's quite hard to do. Wire over the top, pliers over the top, clamp all of that down, and you find that this metal piece goes through your wire and it makes a really nice connection. So that's really useful for spurs, where maybe you want to take a spur off of your bus wire. That's where these come in, and there are 10 of those in the kit. You then also have 40 of these little crimp blades. So obviously what you'll do is you take your wire, strip it back, put that into the crimp it down. Now I should have added that you get some wire crimping tools. That comes in the kit as well from Express Models, really useful. So that basically just crimps down onto the wire, job done. You then grab one of these blade splices, I guess they're called, and these are just brilliant. This is the first time I've come across these. Basically you get your bus wire into the metal clip, fold it over, clamp it down, and then simply push in the blade connector. And it's a really good tight connection. I'm not actually pushing this all the way in, but it's a really tight connector, and that makes a really secure, neat solderless connection, and I've used that all over my layout. Okay, so that's pretty much the Express Models kit. Really useful. I had a little some little switches with push-on connectors. So these don't come in the kit, but I picked these up from Halfords, and I use these for just pushing onto the switches, and again it means that it's solderless, nice and easy. From Express Models, I also bought a number of lengths of dropper wire in different colours. I think I got yellow and green, black and red. The red and the black I actually didn't buy enough of. Buy more black and red than you think you need. I haven't used quite as much of the green and the yellow. I've got stacks of that left over. But again, very useful, and I just ordered that up at the same time. I then from Pico had the dropper wires that are connected, soldered, pre-soldered onto fish plates. Really useful, these. Again, it saved me having to mess around with soldering up to wire, up to the rails, and it makes a really nice connection between each section of track. So again, you know, not overly cheap. There are cheaper ways of doing it, but I found that to be really useful. Then for securing the track around the underneath of the baseboard, I got a number of these connectors and cable ties. And I got these, both of these I think came from B&Q. These came in a pack of 100 for next to nothing. Really useful. I then got from Wilkinson's a number of these little eyelets. These were for the control panel, just to finish off the lights. Again, I think it was less than £1 for about 100, and I used next to none. And then one of the other things that I found really useful during this project, I bought some LEDs, for the layout. I had a few extras, and I rigged up, and you may well have seen me using this across the layout. For testing the switches, I connected it up to a battery. Obviously, if you are running power through the track, then you wouldn't need to have a battery, but very quickly I can see whether I have got connections for my track. So this would be picking up the DCC, or if I'm fitting a switch, before I actually powered the switch, I could do myself a check and make sure that I've actually got power, and that's just using a standard 9-volt battery with some crocodile clips. Be careful not to bridge the join, and yeah, I found that to be invaluable while I was actually working underneath the baseboard. It did mean I could turn all of the electric off when I was cutting things around and playing around with wires, but I could very quickly and easily and visually see that something was working the way that I wanted it to work. Okay, so that's most of the bits and pieces that I used for the layout. When you get your pack, your starter pack from Express Models, you also get a little diagram which is quite useful, and this little diagram shows you what you get in the kit. So this is your bus wire, these are your dropper wires, your crimping tools, the connectors, and your splices up here. And then there's a really useful diagram, these are all lettered, and then you've got the same letter, a really useful diagram showing how you can use the connectors for creating a spur off of your main bus, how you can use the little connectors for fixing the wire, and then how the little spade connectors and that work underneath your baseboard. Really, really nice. If you're not into soldering, I would say definitely invest in one of those kits. Before we go downstairs and look at the actual wiring, I thought it might be worth having a look at some of the diagrams that I put together when I was designing the layout. And I apologise if this video therefore is jumping around a little bit, not my best thought out video. But this is one of the first diagrams that I put together. Now what we're looking at here is the track plan, and forgive me, this is the early track plan, so not the one that I'm actually using downstairs. Things have changed during construction. So for instance, this siding here now comes off of here, and I did away with the 2 points here and the runaround loop because that just didn't really work. But the principle is the same. So we're looking at the track with the sidings coming into the main station area with the industry line and the goods line in here. I've got a couple of triangles, a black and red triangle for my positive and negative. Again, when I started to wire the layout downstairs, I switched these two around, so the red was on the top and the black was on the bottom, but you get the idea. And these are the feeds that go straight to the DCC bus wire, so not actually noted on this diagram other than obviously the triangles. And then you've got the brakes, so these are where my isolators are, and you can see that every single section of track has got power to it. And that was one of the things that I decided with DCC, was every single section of track was going to have its own power supply, and that's going to hopefully stop any problems with running trains where they might stop because power isn't getting to it. So down the bottom here we've got a power supply and we've got a CDU. Now we can ignore these switches for the moment because these are going to be the switches for the signals on my layout, and my power supply is a dual supply, so I've got supply one side and one the other side. So this is going to be for the future, but what we're interested in is the left hand side. So from the power supply we go out to the CDU. From the CDU we power the switches, which are then going to power the points, to point 1, 2, 3, 4 across the layout. So that's basically the wiring diagram that was approved. Now, to help me learn how the point motor, the PL10 and the PL15, was all going to fit together, I did another diagram, which again the guys at Pico helped me to confirm was okay. So we got our main supply into our bus wire, which goes, this was into the Cobalt CDU2, which didn't actually work. Unfortunately, that ended up going back. I couldn't get it to work with the switches for some reason. So what I've now got is the Pico CDU in here. Much the same thing, it just gives a burst of power through the system to throw the switches. So then we've got the bus wires that go off to the layout, and off of the bus wires we've got our on-off switch, which goes into the point motor on the positive and the negative, and then the green wire on the other side of the switch goes to the negative on the bus wire. And then on the other side of the switch we've got the feeds from our track and the feed out to the frog, and we've also got the feeds from our transformer, which basically for me is now the mains transformer, into the switch, and then out on the negatives for the LEDs, which is for my panel, and also for the LEDs back to the positive on the transformer for those switches. Now again, to help me when I was actually mounting the switches, I drew up a couple of diagrams. This one, actually let's go back to the first one. This one here is very simply the micro switches. So I've got my positive in for the DC bus, and then the positive out for LED 2 and LED 1. So this would be the upper and the lower, or whichever way around you want to do it. These are the panel light switches. And then they've got the negative feed from the track, and then the feed to the frog, and the positive feed to the track. So depending which way the switch is thrown, it's either going to make a connection, so negative through to the frog or positive through to the frog. And I found that very, very, very useful when I was under the board wiring up, and I actually did these colours, the same colours as the wires, to make my life a little bit easier. And then because I decided then that I wanted to save my spade connectors, I just went a little bit further to show that the negative is coming from the point and from the switch into the negative DCC bus, and the same the line from the point and the line from the switch into the DCC bus again on the positive side. So those are some of the wiring diagrams that I used while I was putting the layout together. And now let's go downstairs and have a look at the actual layout itself. Right, I'm afraid that I've ditched the tripod for this section, because I've been moving around the layout quite a bit, so I apologise for the camera shake. But to start off with, these are the little Pico dropper wires, which fish plates between the rail joiners straight down into the baseboard, and I applied the rule that the negative, the black, would always be on the bottom, or the rail closest to me, and the positive on the rail further away. Now I'm just doing an end-to-end, so that worked for me. If you're doing an oval or something a little bit more intricate, then that might not work. Now the other thing that I did is every single run of rail has a power feed. So I've got a power feed here. I've got a power feed at the end of this run. For nearly all of the points, I've got a power feed at the foot of the point on nearly every single one. So these I've just got one because I've got 2 points together, and that means that I've got power throughout the layout. Now one of the really good things that Pico do, they've got a technical centre, and I sent in my track plan and they helped me to decide where all of the dropper feeds would go. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant service, and I would suggest that you take up that particular service. It's really good. You'll also see in here, now this was a piece of soldering that I needed to do. I've also got a green wire which is for the frog, to wire the frogs, and hopefully these green wires will disappear when I put the ballasting in. I might need to paint them in if they show a bit too much, but I might need to just do something with that. And again, I've got one of those wires on just about every frog on the layout. Some are more obvious than others. Like I said, I'm not the greatest solderer. Okay, so that's basically the feeds to the track. Over on the control panel, again, all wireless, and you'll have seen this. I've got the Pushon switches with the wires straight into the switches, and they're basically coming up from the baseboard into block connectors from underneath. The black, red and green wires are coming from the Pushon point motors. Then over here I've got my controller, which has got leads straight down underneath the layout, and then the dropper wires will pick up the bus wire. Now this is a dropper wire that's come across basically because I've got a piece of wood under here bracing the board, and this is going to be in a part of the model that's not modelled, so I'm not too worried about that. Okay, there's not an awful lot of room to move under here, so I can't get back too far. But this is the wiring for the panel lights. So I've got the wires from the LEDs coming into block connectors, and then I've got brown and blue wires that are going off to my Pushon point motor switches, and I've obviously got black wires which are going off to the earth on the bus wire. A little bit of a spiggledy mess. I've kept the wires reasonably slack so that I can move things around. One or two of them have gone a little bit tight for my liking, so I would say, you know, if you can, try and leave more wire than you need. And then I've just tidied them up very loosely with these cable ties under here. Now you can see in here, if I stay out of the light, a lot of the negatives have gone straight into one of the block connectors. Let me just see if I can zoom in. Well, it won't focus, it's not enough light under here. You can just about see there that I've got some of the black wires. Let's just fix the focus for you. I've got some black wires which are going straight into the spade connectors and then into the connectors onto the brown bus wire being the earth. Okay, let's just move around a little bit. Right, so as well as my DCC controller, which is on top of the layout, I've also got an old analog controller. The left hand side is powering my point motors, so I've got the wire will go up into the CDU, which is mounted on top of the controller, and then the wire will then go off around the layout for the to the switches for the point motors. And the other side I've got another bus wire which then runs along the layout, and that's going to be for lights for buildings and the like. Now I've done a video on the Pushon switches, so I won't get into too much detail on those, but I've got the little connectors from Halfords were used for the switches. Okay, and then in here we've got a good example of the bridge. So I've got my main bus wire, this brown one, and I needed a bridge off, so I've used this little bridge connector. I think I've only used about 3 or 4 of these on the layout to give myself a spur. You can also see in here the spade connectors, so I've got a couple of lives going into the live on the bus wire, and then that bus wire just runs right the way across. Now I have got 2 bus wires. I've got one set for my lighting, and that goes to my DC controller, and then I've got my DCC bus for the track. So then I've actually used some little tags here so that I can see which is which, and that basically just runs right the way across the layout. And I did use some of the connectors. Now this isn't joined, the wire just goes straight through, but I did use some of these connectors just so that I can keep things neat and tidy under here. And I happen to know that the 2 wires this side are for the DCC, and the 2 wires this side are for the DC controller. So it was quite a nice way of keeping things neat and tidy. Okay, and then again, looking around the other side, so I've got my main bus wires which are running the full length of the board here, and underneath I've got my point motors with all the various wiring going off to the bus wires and also back to the switches. And what I've tried to do is to wire these in groups, and I've used these little sticky cable tidy things with the cable tie around them. Now I haven't run the wire through these blocks because they're quite strong, they're quite rigid, and if I need to change any of these wires, then I can quickly snip the cable tie, drop the wires down, do the work and secure them again. And I've basically done that all the way along. I did use the looms for the point motors, which only brings the cable a certain length, so I've brought it along the baseboard the certain length that it can go, and then I've used the Express Models connectors to extend that wire then around the layout across to the switch block, my Pico switches. But I can't get too far back really. But I think that the wiring is workable. I can work on it and it's reasonably tidy. And where my track runs roughly here, so I've put these markers in, and I've got plenty of room for the scenery in sort of, you know, this part of the layout over here. So I've got plenty of room for dropping wires for signals, lights and the like. So it's a little bit difficult to see under here, but that's how I wired my layout. You can see here that I've got a couple of the droppers that come down through the board, straight across, crimped into the bus wire. Really, really nice and easy. And I've been really pleased with the wiring kits, I've been really pleased with the connectors. And then finally, because you've got so many little bits and pieces everywhere, one of the things that I found really, really useful were these Stanley boxes where you can put in individual compartments and move these yellow compartments around to make double or single compartments. But you know, I was managing to get my wire in, my cable clips, ties, connectors, everything in those. And the one thing, I got these from Wix, it was buy one get one free. The really nice thing I like about these is they snap together. If I just open up this one, you can see again what I've got in this one. So I've got 2 of these. So I've got my eyelets, I've got my wire, I've got my tape, a number of my tools, the bradawl, wire cutters and the like. But the one thing I really liked about these is you can join them together. You can join any number of these together and then you're set to go. They literally just clip together here and it keeps everything really nice and tidy. So you know, whether you go with the Stanley ones or whether you go with something else, I would say definitely invest in some boxes to keep your stuff tidy. Anyway, that's pretty much me for DCC wiring. Read the books, look at other things that are on the website, use the Pico Technical Centre, and hopefully you'll have as easier and as good a time as I've had. Catch you next time. Bye bye.